institution which saved the Eurozone from its crisis, caused by public demand for lower interest rates and early retirement payouts, was the independent European Central Bank. Side proposition wants to carry through the same harm of public demands from states to the only institution which can regulate it from the harm of public fiscal demands on the state. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a flawed policy and cannot be implemented. I'll be dealing with my rebuttal under the heading of the shift towards democracy, because that is basically all the first speaker spoke about, except for the economic crisis, which, like I said, was caused by democratic governments pressuring banks and was then solved by the European Central Bank. So onto the shift towards democracy, all they really told us was that democracy is good and people should have autonomy to vote over things that affect them. Well, we would say that we don't always allow people to vote for things that affect them, unless they're in a good position to vote for things that affect them. And I will be dealing with later in my speech why these voters are unable to make the proper decision. They said that they would educate these voters by providing financial literacy in schools and financial literacy education on websites. Financial literacy education is about 1% of what you need to know to be able to understand monetary policies. Monetary policies are extremely complicated, and I'll be dealing with that later as well. And in terms of improving people's lives, they said that central bankers assist their banks and not the public, and that thus they will do things that will improve the banks. Well, firstly, we say that central bankers aren't allowed to be part of private banks, and if they are in some countries, then that should stop. But furthermore, we think that the very fact that they think raised interest rates are bad for the country inherently shows that it's very difficult to understand the long-term implications of monetary policies. It is often very necessary to raise interest rates. So now to my speech. And I'd first like to look at what sort of a model do we as opposition see and do we want. Well, we envisage an independent appointment process whereby a panel of people made up of selected representatives of government, but mostly made up of economists and academics, select who they deem to be the most appropriate and the best leader for the central bank. This panel will have the ability to review the leader's position if they do a bad job or if they don't stick to the objectives set out for them. The mandate of the central bank is defined by the elected legislature, as in New Zealand, Denmark, South Africa, and Australia, where the Reserve Bank Act of Australia has set out their objectives as to maintain the stability of currency, to maintain full employment, and to ensure the economic prosperity and welfare of the people. We would say that this system is ideal as it ensures that the bank is acting in the people's best interests and working towards objectives decided by the people. Yes, they might not be using mechanisms decided by the people, but we think that when it comes to the details of monetary policies, these decisions should be left up to the experts who have been to university, who have studied economics, unlike the general public. So the key question we need to ask in this debate is, do we need democratization in order to get the best monetary policies? And in order to be showing you why we don't need this, I'll be first looking at the value and purpose of democracy and why it has no value and is unnecessary in the context of the central bank. We would say that on the whole, democracy is a deeply flawed system for a number of reasons. Firstly, inefficiency. Democracy requires consensus building from the masses, which is impossible due to conflicting views in society, leading to watered-down decisions and compromises. Secondly, instability. When a party or anything changes every 4 or so years, this causes changes in previous policies. There are no singular goals, and there is no long-term planning. Third reason, majoritarianism. Democracy relies on the masses who are largely ignorant about what they are voting for. They therefore often make fatally wrong decisions. And fourth is exploitation, which is what you spoke about. The system of democracy is vulnerable to exploitation through a system of patronage that the wealthy. So why do we need democracy? We need it as a safeguard against autocracy and the abuse of power. The only reason we accept the harms of democracy is to avoid the risks posed by the security and military apparatus that someone would be able to have hold of if they decided to abuse their power in the state. And obviously, these risks don't exist in the context of a central bank. Yes?
Obamacare is incredibly complicated. Should Americans be allowed to vote on their health care?
So, like I said, we think democracy is only necessary when it is to prevent the abuse of power. So yes, if it prevents the abuse of power, they should vote, but if it doesn't, then they shouldn't. That's not relevant, sir. But there are several other specific reasons why democratization is not a necessary safeguard in the context of a central bank. Firstly, because we don't think the leaders have any perverse intentions or incentives. They stand nothing to gain from pursuing anything other than what they think is the best monetary policy. Secondly, they have a reputation to uphold. Firstly, so that they don't get fired by the independent panel that I told you about, and secondly, so that they can still be hired in the future and maintain their reputation as a credible economist. No, thank you. We're talking about technocrats, ladies and gentlemen, whose only job is to make smart policy decisions, not take over the central bank. In our world, there exist sufficient natural and institutional imperatives for the crafting of sound and well-intentioned monetary policies. Democratizing this crucial economic institution will only harm ordinary people in the process. So why does allowing people to vote mean bad decisions? Well, we think that economics is highly complicated, and monetary policy is the holy grail of complexity, ladies and gentlemen. Last night, we had a 6-hour crash course in monetary policy, and we still don't understand it. It is extremely complicated, and I don't think we can expect the general public, many of them who have not even been educated in the first place, to understand something like this. We can't expect them to make decisions regarding economic policy on who to vote for. We think that they would generally take their short-term interests at heart. We think that the candidates who you are talking about would tell the general public, we're going to increase employment rates, and the public will just look at that and decide based on that. They will not consider the long-term implications, and the likelihood is that they don't even understand the long-term implications, ladies and gentlemen. This is harmful when we allow a public who don't understand what they're voting for to vote. Side proposition cripples the most valuable financial institution that we have.